Welcome to Spotlight on the Real Science of Sport podcast with Professor Ross Tucker and Gareth Davies.
Hello everyone and welcome back to what is again another news show here on Spotlight. The Spotlight's of course our sort of midweek interlude on the real science of sport, which as of last week we began to split between a science feature where we'll take some of the topics over on discourse, and it'll alternate with a news feature where we take some of the topics that are featuring in newspapers, websites and news stories around the world and offer you some sports science insights. This week's another news show because earlier this week the big Central Governor Fatigue Endurance podcast was released. I had a lot of fun actually talking about that. It was a little trip down memory lane. Some good memories actually. Gareth, I know you've had a chance to listen to that. Just before we tackle the Spotlight news, what were your thoughts on that? Because just for the record, Gareth is posting over on Discourse on a thread called Endure Chapter a Week his impressions reading Alex Hutchinson's book, and it was those impressions that inspired this podcast. So I wondered whether it did justice to what you were reading.
It did, yeah. As I said to you and Mike, I was out walking the dog, and I thought I'll listen to the end of it later, but I never got around to sort of listening to it later. I just kept it on all night almost, to keep listening. It sounds a bit sycophantic, but I thought it was an excellent episode, and I think the others have said the same on Discourse. Somebody said it's great content, and Josh actually says to you, he says, "Don't worry, it wasn't self-indulgent at all," and it was a fantastic episode. I think that's the danger, isn't it? Because you're so involved personally that you feel you don't know how other people are, how it's landing with other people, but it did land really well. It's always really interesting to know the history. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, two things. One is the self-indulgent bit is true. Like I don't really like talking about my all the time. I prefer to talk about the thing than myself. So I'm glad. Thanks, Josh, for that feedback. But the other one is because it's my recollection of my journey and Tim's and the things, the conversations we had, Zigson, Gibson, Vicky Lambert, Frank Marino, by definition, I'm leaving part of the story out, So I'm always worried that I end up making the same mistakes. Like one of the things I would be critical of Hutchinson for in that book was that he didn't spend enough time with St. Clair Gibson and Lambert, and he doesn't do justice to that. But and he maybe spent too much time with some other people, but then how do you keep everyone happy? So I was quite mindful. I didn't want to do that, but it's almost unavoidable. But yeah, I think it was just fun to be able to relate some of those stories and think back at some of the crazy, like that thing about the 25th of December and how we as students, we couldn't believe this was happening. We thought it was the greatest thing ever. Now I look back on it and I go, oh my goodness.
Well, you see, it's those little anecdotes that bring it to life, because I've been really enjoying doing a chapter a week and really looking at the book in depth, because it makes you think a lot more with the hindsight as well. But then you've come and given your own insights as one of the people who actually sort of, you didn't star in the book, you had walk-on cameos, didn't you? But to give that sort of insight has been really excellent. So anybody who's on Discourse who hasn't been reading that thread, because obviously it's just a book review, is it's definitely worth getting in there. So you've put some really long posts in there, so that's definitely added value there on Discourse.
Should write a book or something. Yeah, so that's a thread on Discourse. It's one of many actually. Just looking at it this morning, I'll give you an idea. There's a discussion around whether you should reduce caffeine intake before your race to give a bigger hit on race day. There's obviously the discussion around that latest podcast on endurance and fatigue. There's a discussion around warming up for short sessions, strength training, doping, thoughts on that, more on that to come. So yeah, there's a lot happening on Discourse. And just as a last punt, the way you become a member of that community is you click on the link in the show notes. That'll take you to Patreon. A monthly pledge gets you access to Discourse, and then you can have your say or just have a good read about what some of our really impressively highly informed listeners are talking about. Today, what we're talking about is the news, and so this is a sort of Discourse Digest feature show. And there's a few things to cover, some good, some bad, some interesting, well, hopefully all interesting. And we begin with a development that I think was foreseeable, but I don't know, were you surprised to see this first story about the IOC, Gareth?
Well, I wasn't really that surprised. It was just a case of when, not if.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about, of course, is the news that the IOC is likely to introduce a ban on transgender competitors in the female category at the Olympics. Nothing's been finalised yet, and we're waiting, we're expecting, hopefully, a full decision to be made over the next year, I think 6 to 12 months they were talking about. But it appears that Kirsty Coventry, obviously the new leader of the IOC, she's determined to see this change through. It's been a long time coming, as you say, but there's still going to be devil in the detail because it's not as simple as that. Everybody's celebrating on one side, but there's obviously going to be lots of I's to dot and T's to cross. Any idea why it's going to take so long, though, or what exactly is happening, especially in the sphere, I think, of the DSD athletes? I think the trans side is clear enough. No men in women's sport, end of story. But the DSD side is likely to be slightly more complicated.
They're certainly much more nervous about the DSD issue than they are the trans-identifying male issue, yes, for reasons that are mostly related to how difficult they found it to manage that in the past. Not they, more athletics, but of course in Paris boxing. So before we project forward, let's just take a look back. What happened in this specific story is that in September, the IOC brought a group of experts together to discuss this policy. That would have been, I gather, at the request of Kirsty Coventry. You remember her manifesto to become the leader was, among other things, to do this. The other change that was relevant is just before Coventry took over, the medical director of the IOC changed also. And the previous medical director, somewhat confusingly, was on record as saying it was clear that male advantage existed a few years back, but then had defended and navigated and facilitated the position of the IOC to not assume that there was male advantage. So that was incongruent. But the new woman is a woman called Dr. Jane Thornton, and she, I think, has also been pretty influential here. We know that that meeting happened because it was reported in a website. I forget exactly which one it was. But it was interesting because none of the people who had been involved in the last 3 or 4 years with the IOC were at that meeting. And so it seemed to me that they'd made a call that they were going to bring in some new faces, new ideas. And that was on both sides of the issue. So, for instance, I wasn't aware of the meeting till after it had happened. People like Emma Hilton, Tommy Lundberg, the folk who'd been involved in football and athletics and swimming and cycling and world rugby, none of them were there. So I think the IOC wanted to make a, as far as possible, clean start to this particular issue. And so that meeting was held, and whatever we then saw earlier this week from the IOC was the consequence of that. Now, as you point out, and I think this is true, now we look forward, is will they issue a policy that treats trans women, males, biological males, the same as DSD athletes, like is the case for athletics, swimming? Or will they try and create different policies, which is how athletics' previous iteration was? So that's one of the key questions to I think, look at. And the other one for me is, will they make it a strict, enforceable policy which effectively says to every sport in the Olympic movement, this is how it is. No males in women's sport. And therefore, every sport from athletics all the way down to sailing, whatever's last in the Olympic alphabet, has to comply? Or will they take the softer approach, which is kind of what the previous policy was, which is to issue guidance and then allow the sports to work within guidance but still do their own thing? If they go with the latter, there's a risk that they will create situations where, for instance, track and field, cycling, swimming, rugby have got a policy that excludes males from women's sport, but rowing, for instance, may say we're going to go a different direction on this. And that obviously gets really messy for the sports, because it would mean, for instance, that at your World Championships in sport XYZ, you would be eligible, and then at the Olympic Games, would you be eligible because the IOC says no, but your sport says yes? Or would you just be... Anyway, you get the idea. Clumsy, if that's the case. So that's... And then the third thing is, to what extent do they go with screening followed by testing for advantage, the way that athletics is done, and I think other sports, boxing, for instance? Or will they continue to rely on... I don't want to call it an honesty system, but yeah, that's the big question now. I really hope that they recognize that the DSD cases are male, provided there's the ability to test for advantage, and that they create a policy that then brings some standardization to the issue.
As I said on Discourse, the realization that science says that we shouldn't have men in women's sport is now clear, and the IOC have accepted that. But my fear is that, as you've just said, is that they're going to fudge this and leave it up to other people and be unclear. What I think the IOC needs to do is make a clean break and say, look, this is the way it is. If you've got any sort of male advantage, you cannot compete in any Olympic sport at the Olympics. And hopefully that should be enough then to bring the other sporting federations into line, because the pinnacle of most sports, rowing, archery, whatever it is being at the Olympics. And they won't survive without being at the Olympics. So that's the leverage that they've got to use. I don't think they can fudge around this anymore. We've danced around this so many times. And I've changed my mind on the whole situation, and I think a lot of people have now. There's a lot of anger now, as much as anything else. It was frustration before, which seems to have turned to anger, and we'll get onto that because there's been questions like, would we reallocate medals from the past, which have been stolen from women? And I think the tide has turned, and I think the IOC needs to grasp that now and really just put its foot down and say, no, this is it. Enough is enough.
Like 100% agree. I think you said it really well there. I think it's a good point about the leverage to those sports. The sports at which the Olympic Games are clearly the pinnacle have to fall in line. The only thing there might be a practical thing, because to ask, I mean, it might sound crazy to say this, but there are some sports to whom the screening and testing for advantage might be quite challenging. So then what I hope the IOC does is say, we recognize that we can support you in doing that at your World Championships 3, 2, and 1 year out from the Olympic Games, so that by the time we get to the Olympic Games, we don't get a repeat of some of, but not all. I think mostly it went really well ahead of Tokyo's World Athletics Champs, but there's a risk that in the lead up to the Olympic Games, athletes are saying, we can't get tested, there's insufficient support and resources for us to get screened, and that's a problem. So I would really like to see the IOC come up with a very clear plan for that. That's so, because if you tell people they must do something, then they have to have the capacity, the ability to meet that standard or clear that bar. So I hope they tick that one off. And then regarding the reallocation, I would be very surprised if the IOC goes that far. I think they just want to put it behind them and move forward with what I hope will be the right policy. But I can't see them revisiting those results. What I think they should do is give additional medals out, at the very least. I agree that they could also take the next step. I just don't think they will.
Have you noticed that the image that has been in all the news stories about this has been of the weightlifter, Oral Hubbard? Because that was the clearest example, wasn't it, of somebody being robbed of a medal. And there's also a lot of anger about how long the IOC has taken to do this. And people are saying, don't go slapping yourself on the back, IOC, because you've been in the wrong for so long now. It's only last year that we had the boxes at the games where you had basically men fighting women in the ring. So that anger is understandable. And I don't think it would be going too far to reallocate medals. Or put a big asterisk there and say, you're not going to be able to strip the medal. You're never going to give it back.
Yes.
But you can change the record books, much like the women's world record in the marathon.
Yeah, and I mean, in theory, you could take the medal back. But that's the point. I don't think they'll be prepared to take that step. But I do agree with you. I think they could. They won't, though. But they should. They definitely need to asterisk those medals where they know those cases existed. And I think it would be right and fair to say that the athletes, the women who were denied medals as a consequence of those athletes' participation, should be additionally awarded medals. I think a swap or a reallocation is a slightly different question. Of course, and it doesn't help. Like if you were a boxer in Paris in 2024 and you had to go through either of the two athletes, Ting or Lingsar and Khalif, I mean, if you caught them in the first, second, third, or fourth round, it's because of the nature of that sport, you lost out, and you can never redeem that situation. But where they can give additional medals to reward women who were denied by this, I think they should. The reason I don't think they will, by the way, is they'll say that those athletes were eligible at the time and didn't break any rules in that moment. But the main reason, I think, is because it would be too big a confession of an egregious mistake. For them to go back 15 years now and say, we're going to reallocate medals from 2009, 2012, 2000, even further, 2008, whatever it is, would be actually to say, you know what, we made such a bad mistake that we have to go and fix it in hindsight. They're not going to do that.
And I think a lot, as you say, a lot of this is aimed at the moment at the transgender, those who have chosen to trans to transfer, and so that feels like it's been a man stealing a medal, whereas the DSD athletes is a slightly more complicated case, and so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand why that might be a little trickier to do. So
Yeah.
the timetable, I mentioned 6 to 12 months. Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say you're right. So I just wanted to clarify for people there the where they end up as far as policy pertains is you still have male advantage in women's sport. It's just that they come at it from slightly different directions. The intent in arriving there and the way that they get into that category is a little bit different. But I agree with you, and we said it around athletics. There's no biological reason, logical or biological reason, to treat DSDs differently from trans-identifying males. Anyway, sorry to break your flow there.
No, it was just really to say I mentioned 6 to 12 months because that was, I think Sean wrote about it in The Guardian, and he mentioned it's the only timeline I've seen was 6 to 12 months. So I sort of jumped on that one. Have you got any idea what's going to be happening next or where we go?
I remember now. That was your first question to me a few minutes ago. That I think they don't want it to affect the Winter Olympics, so they won't make an announcement in February when their next big meeting is. And then the next big gathering of the IOC after that is sometime in June or July 2026. And for some reason that I don't fully understand, they want to make this announcement at one of their big quarterly gatherings. There's no reason in my mind why they can't just actually put it out, upload the policy, make it available, have Coventry and Thornton and anyone else available for an online media session to answer questions, and then just get on with it. I don't understand why you want to wait, but they want to wait within their calendar, as I understood it.
So in February, in the Winter Olympics, we could be seeing the same issue arising again.
It's possible, but I did
because
see
they're dragging their feet.
Yeah, I did see something though that the snow and ice sports, and I don't know whether it was global or US, they've announced a policy that is very much in line with athletics. So they're ahead of the IOC on this one. So that might already take care of the problem for those sports. I can't remember which body it was and whether they have jurisdiction over the Olympic Games, but there's definitely something in those sports already. So that might be why they feel there's no need, and then they want to do it in a, I don't know, some of these big sports really value ceremony and and functions. So maybe that's it.
Right here. Anything else on that one before we move on?
No, I just hope there's no major surprise where something in the background is happening. But again, athletics is on, cycling is in, swimming's on. That's the three big sports. Rugby's in. I can't see any source of a late change to this from the IOC now.
Any idea why it came out now? Was it a leak? Because it just sort of it's odd to come out with this and then say, well, we're not going to tell you anything more for the next 6 months.
I do know that the IOC had a meeting last week of all of its member federations, and in that meeting was a presentation by Jane Thornton, the IOC head, medical head, at which she summarized the review process that they'd instigated and some of the opinions that were shared there. So maybe someone who was in that audience has now for the first time seen it and it's leaked.
Or it was coming out anyway. They knew it was going to leak, so you might as well just get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on, because everything has been fraught over with the IOC last year or so. It's been getting even hotter with WADA and USADA, the two big doping authorities. The two organizations, they continue to be at loggerheads. Obviously, we've got the World Anti-Doping and US Anti-Doping. And this time the Enhanced Games has kicked off another broadside from Travis Tygart, the leader of USADA. Because if you remember, prior to the Olympics last year, there was an almighty row when there were 23 Chinese swimmers. They were cleared to compete at the Games, even though they'd tested positive for TMZ. If you remember, it was the hotel restaurant that got the blame. And WADA actually accepted that Chinese contamination claim, but it took a New York Times and a German TV channel investigation to blow the whistle. They blew the whistle, didn't they? And it led to claims of a cover-up from USADA and Travis Tygart, and there was a war of words. And the affair has rumbled on, and the US government is withholding, I think, $3.6 million of its allocated funding to WADA. And then spin on to this week, and head of WADA, Whittle Banker, has called on USADA to help fight the threat of the Enhanced Games. He said, "We're keen to work together. We have to be very united. We really want our colleagues from the US to do more to make sure this event will not happen." There are legal possibilities they can lobby for. USADA have made general comments, but maybe it's time to try and convince the people who have financed this that it's dangerous. That's USADA's role and responsibility because the event is going to take place in Las Vegas. So that's the head of WADA trying to put pressure and leverage on USADA to to make a change to stop the enhanced games. But Travis Tygart, the head of USADA, he's having none of it. And I think you've got a clip of him to play in, haven't you?
Yeah, so initially I guess he must have been making a sort of statement, because maybe before we play this clip, there's a statement in which he calls it posturing or grandstanding or something, no?
Well, he actually says, this is Travis Tygart now. He says, for an organization reportedly part of a criminal investigation by US law enforcement. So he's talking about WADA there. The continued and blatantly false attacks from WADA President Blanca are telling smokescreen.
That's the word I was
So,
looking for, smokescreen. Yeah,
a smokescreen.
yeah, exactly. It's just, given where the Olympics will be in 3 years' time in LA, and USADA are going to be so essential there to collaborate with WADA, it's a very concerning, like, total breakdown in the relationship, because you'd have thought that they'd be, for all the disagreements, you thought in general they'd be more aligned than they are misaligned or not aligned, and it seems that that's not the case. So that was Tygart's strongest wording in response. But then you discovered, and that's what I want to play in for our listeners now and viewers over on YouTube, is an interview with Tygart in which he's a little bit more measured. He gets asked about this, and this is his response coming. It comes in two parts. The first bit is actually in response specifically to Witold Banker and WADA's claim or pressure on USADA to do more. The second part is a more general comment about enhanced games and why athletes are going over there. And we'll pick it up after you've listened to Tygart speaking.
As head of USADA, what can you do to try and stop this competition from happening on US soil? Can you lobby the US government? Can you try and convince them that it shouldn't happen?
You know, in a democracy and in a capitalistic society, the government is not involved with sport. We've had powerlifting, bodybuilding, boxing, other MMA that falls outside of the Olympic movement, and there's nothing the U.S. government, as long as they abide by the other rules and laws that apply, there's nothing the U.S. government or USADA can do to stop an event like that. It's hard to blame athletes if they feel tempted by that, because the system that they're subject to is letting them down. I think what we should control is what we control, which is ensuring our athletes are paid for what they do in a fair and equitable way. And again, that's not anti-doping's responsibility, that's sports' responsibility. And then number two, ensure that when we promise clean sport, that's what we deliver. And that's what's so frustrating and understandably is tempting athletes, apparently, because several athletes have announced they're going to compete in these games. But that's what we can control, and that's what we would fix within our system.
So that's the interview. DW did that and put it out on Twitter. Gareth found it, and we just played it in for you. So that's Tygart speaking. So the two themes there were, first of all, their perceived powerlessness to do something over what is effectively a private entity equates it to powerlifting and a couple of other sports. Generally more correct than it is wrong. And I think, strictly speaking, it's true. WADA USADA doesn't have jurisdiction over a private event that doesn't fall within its Olympic remit, Olympic Sports Federation remit. Specifically, though, on the other hand, I don't think that they should be claiming to be entirely powerless. And I'm not going to be particularly constructive here, but I do think that there are probably creative ways where they can think a little bit more laterally about going after the problem. Because I still feel like anti-doping and the use of drugs for performance enhancement is their remit. And even though it's happening in an event outside of their jurisdiction, it's happening in athletes and people who were, at one point, potentially in theirs, namely Fred Curley, for instance. But more than that, I wonder whether there's not something they could think about where they've got investigative capacity and they understand the landscape, and they could go, for instance, after the doctors who are supporting that process. I don't know whether that's an overreach then for them to do.
I don't know. It depends whether or not it's legal. I presume it is legal in the state of Nevada, the provision of the drugs that are being used. So in which case, I don't think they really got a leg to stand on, USADA. There's not a lot they can do about it.
No, it would have to be on an ethical framework or foundation. But I suppose if you've made the decision to do that, what do you care?
Yeah, exactly. And they've got enough money to fight it anyway. the enhanced games. So I think there's nothing USADA really can do. I did like the phrase where he said, we've got to promise athletes clean sport, and then that's what we've got to deliver, because that's shot fired at about the 23 Chinese swimmer,
Yeah, yeah,
without a
exactly.
doubt. I mean, what Travis, he clearly understands that doping in the enhanced games is a symptom of a disease. But
Yeah, it's
the disease
interesting.
itself is that athletes are underpaid.
Yes, and not that they, because it's interesting. He said something at the end that I don't think is true. He said that's why athletes are going to the enhanced games. He said that they don't believe they're getting clean sport and then they're going to the enhanced games. I don't think that's the case. When you look at who's gone across, Curly didn't go around and isn't going to go around in the enhanced games because he thinks the 7 blokes next to him are doping. That's not true. Nor is Magnussen, nor is it Ben Proud, the swimmer. Is that his surname? Yes, from England. They're not going
Yeah, something like that.
to the enhanced games because they don't think it's fair in the Olympic Games. They're going because the money's bet there. There's an offer on the table to pay them more. So I thought
No,
that
but
was a little
they
bit of
say
a
that.
stretch for Tigard.
A few of them have said that, haven't they? Or they've hinted that
What?
they think that other people are doping, so we can't compete. I'm pretty sure a couple of the swimmers have said that, haven't they?
Yeah, but I don't buy that at all. Like, I mean, Proud is not winning an Olympic medal in 2028 anyway. They're at the
I
back
know,
end
but
of
it
their
sounds
careers.
better than saying, I just want the money.
Yes, that's true. So I wasn't massively persuaded by Tigard's arguments at the end there. I think it's just a carrot. The financial carrot is too big for athletes to
But well,
resist.
that's what I'm saying. The problem is that athletes are underpaid and underfunded in clean sport. And that's what we've seen. And that's, of course, people are going to be tempted to go over. And he recognizes that. But in a capitalist society like America, I don't think there's anything you can do about it.
So then
You can hope it dies away.
here's a glass half full approach. Is the fact that athletes are underpaid in clean sports is encouraging to me because the same phenomenon will be true if more athletes go across to doped sports in the enhanced games. Because if the enhanced games had 2,000 athletes, they wouldn't be able to pay those 2,000 anything like they're able to pay 5 or 6. I mean, that's for sure the case, no?
No, the problem is they can. Because the people backing this,
No,
Theo
they-
and that,
no
are
ways.
multi-billionaires.
They can only pay 10 athletes. Do you think that those multi-billionaires would pay 10,000 athletes like the Olympic Games supports to go and dope? No way. I don't
Well,
think
not
so.
10,000, no. But I reckon they could do 1,000. It's a drop in the ocean to them.
So 1,000 is like the whole of the World Athletics Championships.
Yeah. We'll do the figures. And if we were going to pay it and how much it would cost them. And then we'll look at the money these tech billionaires have got.
I don't think that the enhanced games can scale up and still match the financial rewards of non-enhanced games once it gets above a certain size. I don't think.
Okay.
It'd be interesting to know that, like whether the financial model.
good
of the
thought
enhanced
experiment.
games, yeah. Because at the moment it's cool if you're Magnussen or Proud or Curly, you're going to go there and they're going to give you 7 figures to appear, and especially for a swimmer where your opportunities in the shop window are so limited, that money might look really good. It's an extra zero maybe compared to what you see normally. But if there were 50 other swimmers with you and you had to share the pot, is the pot going to get 50 times larger? I don't know.
No, and I suppose, I mean, we've been talking about their agenda as anti-aging and
Yes.
selling drugs and things like that. Well,
Yeah.
you're not going to get your money back on that. So it all depends on whether they're doing it to make money or whether they're doing it for their own agendas and
Yeah.
personal.
I mean,
you know,
There was
ambition.
there was a financial model for the enhanced games that Nick Harris published, and some of the numbers were obscene, but I think they were just wildly unrealistic. I don't know. I mean, it was my first thought. Now it just occurred to me is I don't know whether the lucrative nature of enhanced games scales as the number of athletes goes across. I think the pie would be cut into more smaller pieces, not get bigger.
And it's only a matter of time before somebody drops dead. And then that will probably put the mockers on the whole thing.
Potentially, yeah.
Maybe.
Anyway, it's
Hey, there might be a new member of the enhanced games. Do you see? Do you remember the Athletics World Championships in Eugene in 2022?
yes.
The 100 meters final. You probably can't remember it. Were you there?
No,
Or was
I
Mike
was. No, we were going to go, and then at the last moment, Mike couldn't make it, and so I was up in Portland,
right,
but I
yeah.
didn't go to those games. I was there the week before.
Well, the 100 meters final, it was an American sweep. You had Fred Curley, Marvin Bracey Williams and Trayvon Bromell. They stood on the podium in that order, but only one of them, Bromell, today remains in the sport. And the other two are now both serving doping suspensions because this week Williams has been banned for 45 months for anabolics. A whistleblower sounded the alarm in early 2024, and Williams has been target tested, and he came up glowing. Williams, he attempted to tamper with the subsequent investigation, not sure on the details of what he did, but then he admitted his guilt and got a year off the ban for admitting the infraction, which I never understand this, why they sort of, he tried tampering with the investigation, then he comes up clean and they say, oh, well, you can still have a year off. So, but in addition to that 1 year reduction, USADA, they granted him a reduction of his sanction for providing, as they put it, important substantial assistance to the investigation, which means that he's basically snitched on somebody by the sound of it. But it gets better. While under investigation, he also managed to accrue 3 whereabouts failures. So he got another 24 months for those. So if you're following this, he got 21 months for the doping and tampering and 24 for the whereabouts, which leads us to his 45-month suspension. So as I thought, well, he's going to end up in the enhanced games, except nobody knew why he disappeared from the scene. But obviously he was suspended. And now there are rumours swirling everywhere about this one because his coach was one Dennis Mitchell, who obviously coaches a lot of other US sprinters.
But wait, there's more. The thought plickens, as someone once said. There's also a rumour that Dennis Mitchell was the whistleblower. Did you see that on Discourse this morning?
I did read that.
This whole thing is this is like Pretty Little Lies meets Homeland, like sort of saga, because now it's being alleged that, and this was in fact made known last year in August. There's a website that covers a whole bunch of tweets that were shared by someone who goes by Ray Edwards over on Twitter or X or whatever, and it was alleged in August, before we knew of this ban, that it was actually Dennis Mitchell who was the whistleblower, because Bracey went to Mitchell and said, I'm taking the testosterone. And Mitchell was upset because he didn't want him working with a specific doctor who prescribed it. And so that's the kind of like rumor mill that's now spinning around this particular story. And you have to wonder whether that's part of what Bracey was collaborating them with about on.
Yeah, it's completely unsubstantiated.
Yeah.
But the fact is that somebody did actually tweet about this, like, back in August. So somebody knew something before then. So you've got to think, there's something. There's no smoke without fire, sort of thing.
Exactly.
But it's a crazy one. Do you want? The rumors are getting swirling even more because that World Track Athlete of the Year awards that we mentioned last week,
the one that ground your
gears, Chebet
yes.
and Melissa Jefferson wouldn't.
Yes.
Yeah, and we said, oh, perhaps it's because Kenya are under so much suspicion because of doping. Chebet didn't get in. Well, Jefferson wouldn't. She's coached by Dennis Mitchell. And so the theory now is that it's a silent protest about doping by World Athletics. That's why Jefferson Wooden didn't get in. So you can make of it what you want. But it's a crazy time, isn't it? Because you've got Kenya, you've got USADA claiming like the Chinese are doing this, while meanwhile there's a bucket load of American athletes getting busted. It's just, you couldn't make it up.
Yeah. So despite the sort of unsubstantiated nature of these specific claims, I think conceptually what it shows is, and you said it earlier, is that somebody knows something. And once again, it's just frustrating because anti-doping seems powerless to get that information. And even where we have reason to think they might have that information, thanks to the cooperation that got a guy 15 months reduced sentence on his ban, because that's what it is for Bracey, if my abacus was working as he went through those timelines, there's information out there that has given an athlete 15 months off. Now I'm asking, well, what's going to happen next? Because that information had to have been worth something for him to get a reduction. And if it was worth something, I am anticipating another announcement soon. And if that announcement doesn't come, then...
something, and people...
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So, yeah, that's the stories in the world of anti-doping at the minute. But we won't go... We've got a non-doping story. Non-doping controversy story.
We hope.
Remember USADA?
USADA?
Yeah. Well,
USADA or something. How do you say this word? USADA.
USADA? Yeah. Well. She's now 14, right?
Yeah, we better say who she is, because if I hadn't read the story, I wouldn't have known who it was.
Right, okay. Okay. No, exactly. I was about to say, no. So at the Chinese National Games this week, 13-year-old Prodigy, usually, she entered the 200-meter individual medley as the top seed, and she absolutely smashed the Asian record. She swam 2:07.41. So, considering that the world record, I believe, is 2:05 something from Summer McIntosh,
2:05.70.
this is quite an incredible performance. Yeah, for a 13-year-old. Now, she took 2 seconds off her own personal best in the last 3 months. So, when I was thinking about this, as a 13-year-old, she's going to be developing physically anyway. So, it's impossible to tell whether her meteoric rise is to do with that growth in her physical development, because there's going to be no athlete biological passport that's valid on her at the moment, is there? Because surely the athlete biological passport can only start working when you have matured. Would that be right?
It's a good question. I mean, because the biological passport is looking only at blood values, hemoglobin, hematocrit, reticulocytes, I'll be honest, I don't know what those do as you go from being a 12, 13-year-old to being an adult. Certainly in boys, one of the main influences of testosterone is to increase hemoglobin. And so you would make a pretty safe prediction that a 12 or 13-year-old boy pre-adolescence would have quite different blood values compared to an 18, 19-year-old adult. I'm not 100% sure, actually. It's an interesting question whether that's the same in girls as it is in boys. But you're right. I mean, it's massively confounded by development, not only on the biological passport side, but on just growth factors that would affect performance. So it becomes quite a tricky one because, and actually it allows us to revisit another name that we heard, because the listeners may recall the first time we heard of UGD was back in the Swimming World Championships early this year, because at the age of 12, I think came 5th in the 200 butterfly. Do I have that right? Or was it just made the final? Either way, it was top 8 in the world at the age of 12. Is that correct? Is my memory? It's about that.
She got a bronze medal
In the relay.
In the relay, yeah. And she came 4th, yeah.
4th, okay.
In the butterfly in the 200.
Yeah, and we spoke about this 12-year-old Prodigy and so on, and it made us think back to, in the 2012 Olympics, there's a Chinese swimmer called Yi Shi-wen, who won the 200 and the 400 medley. And I remember getting a photograph of a newspaper in London at the time, the day after those gold medals that were won. And it was one of the sort of tabloid papers, take your pick. And the heading was "Turtle Blood in the Water," which of course was reference to the famous Chinese approach of doping. And they used to say, we just drink turtle blood. And so there were accusations against Shi Wen, who at the time in the London Olympics would have been 16 years old. Now you're talking about an athlete who's 3 years younger. And that record that GD broke in China was Shi Wen's record. So just for the sake of explaining how this is so complex, Shi Wen was really interesting because in 2010, when Yi Shi Wen was 14 years old, so call it a year older than GD, Shi Wen swam 2:09.37 rather in the 200. The following year, 2:08.90, so half a second faster. And then in London was the big breakthrough, 2:07.57, so a second and a half faster again. What's interesting about Shi Wen is that that's as fast as she ever went at the age of 16. At 17, Shi Wen failed to win a medal, swam 2:10 something. 2014, swam 2:09, didn't win a medal. 2015, made the final, came last in the final in that same event. In Rio 2016, qualified 4th but finished last in the final. And so Shi Wen's peak was at 16. So when you forecast what a 13-year-old is going to do, sometimes you're already looking at the person as fast as they're ever going to be in their lives. You would have thought the GD is going to get a little bit faster. And her time was 2:0. What was it? Remind me. 2:0. It'll be 2:07 something.
2:07.41.
So she's, call it 2 seconds off McIntosh's world record. So it's an interesting one to track because by 2028...
Well, at that trajectory, she'll have it by Easter.
Yeah, because it's already 2 seconds faster than it was 3 months ago.
Because everything is linear in my head.
So it's an interesting one, right? Because I looked up where swimming was in the 2024 Olympics. That Olympic title was won by McIntosh. Then it was 2:06.56. She's since gone almost a second faster. GD's time would have been good enough to win bronze in that Olympic final from Paris 2024.
See,
so, but
if I was to be...
yeah, cynical.
No, go on. No, go on. You continue.
I was just going to say,
I'll be cynical later.
the reason it's an interesting one to track is because by 2028, GD will be, 16 years old. She'll be She Wins age. And that's going to be quite a rivalry because she's probably better at freestyle and butterfly than she is at the medley. She'll mature, so maybe she'll get better at it. So I reckon 2028, if she continues to improve, McIntosh GD is going to be like the big swimming story of the Olympics. With
If
all
she
of
doesn't
its
tail
subtext.
off,
Yeah, and then it'll have all of that subtext involved. It'll be a big story, I reckon. Be cynical?
See, if I was to be cynical, I'd be thinking, if you've got a youngster like that and you're sort of doping them, then it would be around 16 or whenever when the ABP would kick in, the biological passport, and then you'd be under more scrutiny.
Well,
And that's when your
yeah,
results would start to fade.
yeah, for sure. And you're going to be under
See,
scrutiny when you start winning.
That's my cynical look at it. But of course, I'm looking at this thinking because of the 23 Chinese swimmers with the TMZ and all the stuff swirling around them, and you can't ignore that. So when you see a Chinese 13-year-old phenomenon, then you're going to be obviously putting 2 and 2 together, and in my case, probably making 5. It's awful to be so cynical.
Maybe 4.2, but closer to 4 than 5, I reckon you're making there. And the reason I say that is because I do have doubts that people who are not yet on the radar as clear candidates for testing probably do get away with more. And the moment you become or put yourself on that radar, you will be tested more. And just bear in mind that the ABP is not the only tool in the toolkit for anti-doping. So the athlete would have to be tested far more regularly out of competition, and that will have to happen now. But the question is who does it, and this is where you get the same old thing around who has jurisdiction over the Chinese athletes, the Russian athletes, the Kenyan athletes, countries where maybe it's not as stringent and widespread resourced to do the anti-doping testing. So yeah, I don't think your cynicism is entirely misplaced, and it'll be interesting to see whether that trajectory continues even at a slowed down rate or whether it reaches a peak. And if it does reach a peak, it could be biological as well as anti-doping. Who knows?
Exactly. Okay, so we'll move on to and finally, because I've got an and finally from the tennis world today.
A couple actually.
And I'll kick mine off.
Go
a
for
couple,
it.
yeah. I'll kick mine off because I saw a tweet from Joe Pompliano. Battle of the Sexes, he says, is officially back. World's number 1 Sabalenka will pay world's number 652 Nick Kyrgios in Dubai on December the 28th. He says, Kyrgios says he will try, but women can't return our serves, and he will win 6-2. So we've seen a number of these over the years, haven't we? Men versus women in tennis.
Yeah.
This one's got a slight twist. There's going to be, the court dimensions are going to be 9% smaller on Sabalenka's side, giving Kyrgios less room to land winners. So they seem to be trying to sort of even things up slightly. I thought that was an odd twist on this one.
I hadn't known that.
And both players
That's
will be limited
interesting.
to 1 serve per point.
So they'll have 1 serve because they want to try and neutralize power. That's clever.
Yeah.
What's
But
not?
yeah, it's going to be... Now, I noticed it says it'll be 9% smaller on Sabalenka's side, giving Kyrgios less room to land winners. So I presume that's the tram lines, is it?
Well, I was literally going to ask, like, what's 9%? Like, what's the length of the baseline in a tennis point? I didn't know. I actually didn't know they were doing that. All I'd seen is they were playing each other. I didn't know that they were tinkering with some of the dimensions, which I think is actually quite clever.
I mean, well, we know that there's a strength. Men are 9% or 10% stronger than women in general, don't we? In the power aspect.
Strength-wise, it's way higher. It's
So
like
are
30.
they trying to? Oh, strength. Oh, so what's 9? I always get this one wrong.
Yeah, like in the endurance events, the gap is between 9 and 12%. So swimming, cycling, and running performances are between 9 and 13%, call it. And then when you start looking at power type events, the gap get 20% and then 30%. And then eventually for upper body strength, the gap is probably 40 to 50%. So what's the metric in tennis? It's probably rotational power at the shoulder for the serve. And that's probably the biggest difference between them. But also racket head speed will be higher, and then speed of running will be 10 to 20% higher on the men's side.
Well, Kyrgios says, he said, the research said that men were not 9% superior, but I guess with the dimensions they're using, it kind of evens it up as much as we can for us to go out there and compete. But then again, I don't think Kyrgios knows much about science, does he? And I can't believe he's 652 in the world. And then I realise he's been injured for forever. He's a wasted talent, wasn't he?
I think Kyrgios in the last 2 years, I reckon he's commentated more than he's played. But yeah, he is. I mean, he's arguably go down as one of the most talented but unfulfilled talented players in the men's game ever. Not surprising if you said who do you think is most likely to get involved in the type of game like this, he'd probably be top of that list. He's the guy. 9% is weird because it does seem a little bit arbitrary. I don't know whether they've got any data to back up why they're doing it at 9%. Why not 12%?
Probably just make it easier to change the court, because if they're going to be changing sides as well, and he's going to have a smaller side, then it's going to have to be marked out. I don't know. It'd be an interesting one to watch. I like these odd little.
But 9% can't be the width of two tram lines, because that implies that the width of the singles baseline is going to be 20 tram lines. Sorry. Anyway, we're sort of waffling. That's funny.
But we got some tennis experts in discourse. Over to discourse on this one, because we've come in completely unprepared, because you didn't even know it was being changed.
Yeah, I didn't know they were doing that. I think it's a cool idea though, and I think I like the first serve, single serve idea even more. I think that's a better one to go with. Take the power out the game. But 28th of December, we'll feedback what we thought of it once we've watched it, if it's shown somewhere, YouTube or something.
Yeah, it's bound to be. I'll be, yeah.
Okay, last and finally.
And the last and finally, which was a post on X from the tennis letter, it says, they put up a graphic and it shows that the world number 3, Alexander Zverev, is closer in points to the world number 1,000 than he is to the world number 2, Yannick Sinner. So Alcaraz in the rankings has 11,050 points. Yannick Sinner has bang on 10,000. And Zverev has 4,960. Meanwhile, at number 1,000, Elgin Quabal, he has 15 points. But even so, it shows the incredible gap between the top 2 in tennis and everybody else.
Yeah, and I think it's partly the way that the tweet was structured. I think it's meant to make you think that the difference between 3 and 1,000 is bigger in performance than the difference between 2 and 3. They're definitely trying to hint at that.
Yeah,
it's not the case. That's not what the so that's not what the ranking points reflect. But I think what it shows is that the ranking.
In which case,
yeah,
the ranking points, the way they work out the ranking points, is probably slightly broken, maybe.
Yes, if you apply the ranking points as a true measure of the difference between 1 and 1,000, it's probably broken. But then I don't think they're meant to be applied like that. I think the problem here is that the ranking points disproportionately reward winning a semi-final at a Grand Slam. That's what I think you'd find. And I think it should be that, because that's the game that matters the most to, like, being the number 1 player, right? Can I win a semi and then there's a final? So obviously winning the final's got to do the same thing. But it's I think it's logical that you should get more points for winning competitive hard matches in Grand Slam and Masters 1000 tournaments than you should for winning, say, a first round game. And I think that's what's happening here, is that Zverev is winning all the way through to quarterfinals, semifinals, but never winning those, not ever beating Alcaraz, which is why the last 4 Grand Slams have had the same 2 guys in the final, no?
Do you think tennis
Australia
is the better for these
Alcaraz
two?
didn't make the final.
No, he missed the one, didn't he?
Yeah, Australia. But that's why they've played the last 3. They've been in all the semis this year. Since, of course, Sinner wasn't in Australia. That's maybe because was he serving his ban then? Oh no, wait, he did play it, because then he got the ban after Australia, conveniently before the French.
Yeah, he didn't miss anything, did he? Yes. Apart from a couple of small tournaments.
Exactly. So I think those 2 have been absolutely dominant in the Grand Slams, and that's what you see in that statistic. But arguably, if Zverev plays Sinner and Alcaraz, he's much, much closer to them than if the 1,000th guy in the world plays Zverev. That's clear. Like, the performance level is not reflected by the ranking points, is the point. You were asking, do you think tennis is better off for having such dominance?
Yeah, better off or weaker. Because when we had the dominance, we've always had dominance in men's tennis, but not women's tennis, and we mentioned that before.
Yeah, yeah.
But just having these two, it's gonna. Although the matches are of superb quality, doesn't it just run the risk of just becoming routine and boring?
I think it's really, really good in the short term and very, very bad in the long term. And I don't know when that transition happens. But like for sure, like tennis now, you remember after the French Open final, everyone's watching Wimbledon thinking there's only one result we want to see here, and they got it. And then you see it in the US Open, and they got it. At some point, that will wear off, and then it becomes a bad thing. But for now,
Do you reckon?
like we're in Turin at the moment for the Masters ATP finals. Like when the final is reached, and if those two are not in it, I think it loses all its air. Because that's the problem with having two guys only. With 3 or 4, when you had Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, and then even at one time Murray, no matter what happened, you knew the final would be really big. At the moment, it feels like a letdown other than one particular matchup, which is a problem, I think.
The contrasting personalities seem to help as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So, yeah, I reckon by French Open next year, if there's not a third player in the mix, I think it starts to look a little bit stale.
And a third player who's actually interesting.
Yes, you need that.
We tend to get a cast of like sort of rotating walk-ins in tennis, don't you?
On both sides, you do.
Medvedev and people like that who sort of appear and then disappear, but they never really hang around. But you want somebody who actually grips, because these two really do grip the public imagination. I don't know.
Yeah,
they've just got that it factor
because of the contrast, especially it polarizes. If you ever want to see crazy fans, you go look at tennis fans on Twitter. My goodness.
Yes, I know.
Or Reddit or anywhere else. Anyway, that's a wrap. Thanks very much for listening. As always, the conversation continues on Discourse. I told you at the start how you join, but I'll say it again. Link in the show notes. Make a monthly pledge, and you can follow on and share your views and point out where we were wrong about tennis or swimming or any other subject we've covered. We always welcome the feedback. We will be speaking to you again next week, where I think we probably are going to turn our attention to some of the other topics on Spotlight, on Discourse rather, that have a more sort of science focus and pick out some of the things you've been discussing around scientific principles of training and performance and so forth. So that'll be for next week. For now, though, have a good weekend, and we will speak to you all again soon. Bye-bye.